So it's a rather colossal change to the Warhammer 40k rules today. Just how bad is this command point change, and how much is it going to affect your army? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about the big command point change that's going to be coming towards the end of this week in Warzone Nephilim. Games Workshop has hinted a few times as to how exactly this is going to take effect. It seems that today they've just unveiled the whole thing in full on a Warhammer community article. I must admit, as changes to the game go, this one is a rather big one, and it's going to affect a fair bit of different army construction and what you might want to take, and it seems that the reactions to this are rather mixed. They have teased these rules a few times already now, but on Warhammer Community today, they basically revealed 3 different changes to command points. The big shift away from having command points at the start of the game and getting access to them through the rest of the game. A new change to the first Warlord trait and relic, which looks fairly painful to be honest. You don't get any free Warlord trait and relic anymore, you have to pay for them already. And finally, a small buff to the Super Heavy Auxiliary detachment, which means that you can now get them for free if the faction matches your Warlord's one. Let's go through each of these changes in turn, and then a quick summary as to how I think it's going to affect armies and whether or not it's good or bad. So first up we have this big command point shift. I'd say this one's perhaps the biggest and most impactful, and I think it might be perhaps in response to the community survey that they did a while back. They had several questions as to how much people were enjoying stratagems and how much they added to the game, and I have a feeling that they got a whole load of response about frustration about stratagem bloat, and that people wouldn't be against them having less impact. This does feel like it might be a reaction to that feedback in a way, as the changes do mean that stratagems will have less impact, particularly pre-game and in alpha strikes. First up, they're effectively halved at the game start. In incursion games, you only have 3 command points to play around with, and in Strike Force you had 6, where previously you would have had 12. Those remaining command points are redistributed, and it means that you'll now gain 1 both in your own command phase and also in your opponent's command phase too. It means that you'll kind of be drip-fed an increased amount of command points throughout the rest of the game. Starting with such a low number really does create a lot of pressure on the options that you might have wanted to build your army with though. Badly here to be things like multiple detachments or the more specialist type detachments. I think if you can run your army in a functional battalion or patrol or something, then it's going to be a lot more tempting to, rather than going for something like an Outrider or a Vanguard detachment. It'd be pretty painful building around a very heavy elite detachment if you had to give up half of your starting CP to do so. Then it'll also hit armies that had a big CP spend pre-game, even if they were building around one of those cheap detachments already. If you're buying in a lot of Warlord traits and relics, then you'll suffer a bit more here. There's quite a lot of armies out there that would quite routinely fill up on all 6 of their allowed relics and Warlord traits. I guess technically you can still do that if you use certain detachments, but it means that you'd be starting on 0 CP, and a lot of stratagems will be out of your reach right at the start of the game. The armies that like to buy in loads of stuff early on will get hit very hard here, in particular the Adeptus Mechanicus. They'd often spend tons of things pre-game, as it often made sense to buy in things like squad relics or warlord traits, which they could put on their Skitarii. Also, anything else that you had to spend pre-game for will see a bit of a downturn. Relic datasheets from Forge World, like Leviathans or Contemptors, might be a little bit less popular. And it's not exactly great news for Chaos Demons with their exotic Greater Demons, as that is one of the biggest strengths of their army, and now they're significantly harder to obtain. I think there might be a bit of a shift to bringing some more named characters along, as you don't have to invest CP to make them good, they just do what they do without any additional investment. The other things that are going to be hit are early game stratagems, things like redeployment moves, like say Alpha Legion have, or rapid redeployment from the Ultramarines to set up a unit somewhere else in your deployment zone. They'll both hurt a little bit more if you don't have that many CP that you're starting with in the first place. It's also going to really stop people from dumping all of their command points into massive Alpha Strike combos, say spending 4 or 5 command points to just soup up the shooting of a unit to crazy levels and hopefully kill a whole bunch of enemy stuff before it even gets to strike. I feel like, at least on paper, then shifting the command points to later in the game might have been to try and prevent people from playing all of their command points as early as possible to really try and get the Alpha Strike on the opponents. On the flip side, getting more command points in every command phase is interesting as well. In general, it's more useful to have the command points early if you can, so restricting them this way means that you might have a few more tactical options later in the game. Sometimes could be useful, sometimes less so maybe. It'll be a bit weird for the player who's going first, who will actually be gaining a command point when they don't have any turns remaining, so I guess they'd have to use that on a saving throw or something. It could be a little bit more of a pain to keep track of in enemy turns. You're going to have to remember to put on your command point both in your turn and your opponent's. I guess potentially double the chance to forget, but I suppose if your opponent's ever adding a command point on, then you should remember to do so too. I guess also the fact that you're getting a command point in your opponent's turn might also encourage you to play a few more defensive type stratagems, say re-rolling a save or Overwatch, or any codex specific ones that say boost your army's defense, like transhuman physiology I suppose. It means that you usually be guaranteed to have one command point to make your army tougher, and you can't have spent it already because you didn't have it yet. Next up, and I must admit a bit more of a surprising change, is that they've doubled down on this pre-game pressure by also meaning that you've got to pay for your initial Warlord trait and relic. Normally at the moment you get these for free, one free Warlord trait and one free relic, and then you have to spend more CP if you want to buy in others. So if army lists wanted to remain the same, they'd have to essentially fork out another 2 CP, never mind all the pressure that they've had from only starting with 6. That would potentially lead to some very hard choices. If you want your Warlord trait and relic, then if you've taken a detachment like an Outrider, you've only got one command point left, either to spend in the first turn or to give another random relic or Warlord trait to something else. It really doesn't feel like you're going to have a lot of options on the table at the start of the game. Overall, if you are paying for these initial upgrades, then command points will be reduced in general from 17 CP overall in a game of Strike Force down to 14 CP. 2 will be spent on a Warlord trait and relic, and you just get 1 less in general, as you've started 6 less than you had before, but you're only gaining 5 more over the turns. It is just a bit of a nerf to command points in general. You won't have as many of them to play with, and they'll come later. I saw a few people debating about models that get multiple Warlord traits, such as Mortarion or Magnus for example. I suspect that you'll still just be able to get all of their Warlord traits just for the 1 CP. I guess that would make things like Primarchs extra tempting to have as army leaders. While the first change seems to have fairly mixed reception, people being a bit more open to the idea, this one does seem like a fairly unpopular change overall. I think the reason for this is that generally people enjoy having multiple Warlord traits and relics running around. It gives your heroes a bit more character. It's quite an evocative thing in game to say that they've got some sort of fancy relic blade or a different command ability, and making them really limited as to how many you can take does perhaps take away a bit more flavour from the army and some interest in building combos and army construction. Warlord traits and relics are usually quite major sections in a codex, and making them feel really quite limited I don't think is really going to be a feel-good change. Normally people get more excited by playing things if they have more fancy toys to play with, not less. I guess they're going for armies feeling super unsupported and really on the ropes in Warzone Nephilim. It'll be interesting to see if these changes persist into the next one or not, or if they're just a single one-turn thing for one season. Finally, for the 3 big command point changes, we have super heavy auxiliary detachments. Previously, they were reduced to cost just 1 command point if you had your Warlord as the same faction as the super heavy. Now, if that's the case, they'll be completely free. It's pretty good news if you were bringing along something like a Monolith or a Baneblade. At least these things won't be sapping your command points anymore, and it does make them seem like much more viable options for the army. You can just weigh them up based on their points values, as opposed to weighing up the opportunity cost of command points. Super heavies will certainly still have their disadvantages. They won't normally get sub-faction traits if you've filled them as an auxiliary, such as chapter tactics and things for an Astrius perhaps. And Titanic models do have a lot of their own issues. They struggle with objectives sometimes, and don't get on well with things like obscuring terrain. Still though, it seems like it's a small buff for these as a class, which I don't think really is the worst thing, as most of them tend to be fairly bad. I'd say maybe the strongest options at the moment are perhaps the Tau Storm Surge. That thing's just a very efficient unit with a massive damage 12 gun. And perhaps Imperial Knight auxiliary detachments if they're already fielding a super heavy detachment and they want to field some free blades because they don't have enough slots. That does seem pretty nice if it doesn't cost any command points to do that anymore. Otherwise, perhaps some notable ones are the Astrius, which can be buffed up quite nicely with Iron Hands things, and the Khorne Lord of Skulls I still think is okay for Chaos Space Marines, though I'm sure it'll be changing very soon. Currently, without the core keyword, it can get all manner of crazy buffs from characters and things, making it punch a little bit harder than it perhaps was intended to. So overall, I think these command point changes are a bit of a mixed bag. It's essentially nerfs to quite a lot of rule sections in the codex, and it's maybe going to make the game a bit more focused on actual datasheets interacting, as opposed to big combos with things like Warlord traits, relics and stratagems. If your army was dependent on strong stratagems, then they've taken a small hit. You'll get fewer of them in total, and you'll get access to them later, which is usually a bad thing. If your army was built around delivering some crazy alpha strike damage with multiple stratagems on one unit, it's particularly not good. Warlord traits and relics are also effectively nerfed as well. You're giving up a lot more of an opportunity cost to buy these in, and you're going to go from a lot of armies running 6 of these down to 4 or fewer, I think. Ones that are of borderline worth are now going to be far more edge case than they were, and it particularly punishes armies that wanted to spam lots of characters with lots of upgrades throughout the army. Say Genestealer Cult and Admech I don't think will enjoy this very much. Finally, multiple detachments are also kind of nerfed as well, as you'll have less command points to make them happen. It's not great for armies that were playing themselves around a Vanguard or an Outrider detachment, and you're less likely to spam them to access certain datasheets, such as multiple Tau Commanders or say Tyrannid Hive Tyrants. It might help elite armies a little bit more if they can make an entire army work out of a battalion detachment, or if you've got any other way of making other detachments work, like Imperial Knights and their Super Heavies, or Dark Angels with their Ravenwing Outriders and Deathwing Vanguards. Overall, I don't really think that the average game of 40k is going to get much less enjoyable because of this. Perhaps a little bit less focus on stratagems isn't the worst thing ever, but I do feel a bit sad about the Warlord trait and relic changes. I feel like they do make the army feel a little bit more bland if you can't take them that much, and it's just a bit annoying for armies that were already used to running multiple different copies of them all over their list. It certainly sounds like list building in this is going to be a bit trickier. You're going to have to make some hard choices as to whether or not you want better detachments or different relics and things. It'll be interesting to see how different factions adapt. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the changes down in the comments below. Do you like it? Do you hate it? And what would it mean for your army? I'll hopefully try and get a follow-up video to this out about the new secondary objectives, which they have shaken up quite a bit and shown off some cool new ones, so I'll hopefully have that out as the next video after this. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which is how I can keep so many videos like this coming quite so regularly. If you have been enjoying a lot, the link is down in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few rewards, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.